I have full confidence in Catherine and William. Their judgment is sound, their loyalty unquestionable.
King Charles walked into the state chamber knowing one thing. This was it, the final public moment of his reign. No victory lap, no big triumphant speech, just him and a sealed envelope containing Queen Elizabeth's dying wish. A secret decree about Prince William's future that had been locked away since the day she passed. But the second Charles put pen to paper, everything changed. The monarchy would never be the same again. Now, before we break down what this actually means for the royal family, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. King Charles felt every eye in the room tracking him as he walked across the throne room at Buckingham Palace. Senior royal staff, hand-picked family members, and key players from the Privy Council, the inner circle of advisors who handle major state affairs, all stood there in dead silence. Not a single person in that room knew what was actually written in the document, and that secrecy made the room feel heavy. People were already on edge about his scaled-back schedule, so him showing up in person made one thing clear: this was definitely not business as usual. William stood just a few feet away, doing everything he could to hide his shock. The prince knew this declaration was handing the reins over to him, meaning he would be running the day-to-day operations of the crown, while his father stayed king in name. Charles kept his eyes locked on the paper. He knew if he looked at his son even once, the emotion behind his decision would show right through. Camilla stood frozen. The queen consort had spent years carving out her place beside the king. But as those words were read out loud, you could feel the power in the room shifting straight to William. She could feel the ground moving beneath her feet while Charles pressed his seal into the wax. Just like that, it was official, public, and there was no going back. Then the king finally looked up, according to official records set aside for the royal archive. He revealed that Elizabeth had handed down this instruction during one of their last private chats at Windsor Castle. It was meant to stay locked away until he felt duty could simply no longer wait. That moment had arrived. Charles pulled off his signet ring, the engraved ring used for royal stamps, and set it right beside the declaration. His hand rested there for a beat before he looked over at William. "Your grandmother prepared you for this long before either of us knew why." The air in the room went completely still. Lying right beneath the signed paper, William spotted a second envelope with Elizabeth's handwriting and his own name on it. But before he could find out what his grandmother had left for him, he had to look his father in the eye, the man whose choice had just reshaped both of their futures. To the public, Charles and William were king and heir, two men bound by blood, divided by destiny. But behind closed doors, their relationship was a complex mix of unspoken disappointment, respect, rivalry, and fear. Now, power was shifting between them, not because of a funeral or a grand ceremony, but because a father chose to step back. For William, taking on the role felt heavy with the realization that Charles had hit his own personal breaking point. William followed his father into a private room, both staying quiet until the door shut. The prince was already handling more events, big-picture meetings, and Commonwealth duties, the global network of nations tied by history that looks to the monarchy for continuity. He was ready to back up the king, not take over the real authority while his father was standing right in front of him. Charles knew what was coming before his son even said a word. "Why didn't you tell me?" William's voice didn't sound angry at first, just hurt. The king looked at his hands and confessed that telling him sooner would have forced William to carry the secret by himself, putting on a smile for the cameras while knowing his whole life was about to flip. He simply refused to put that weight on his son until he had no other choice. That answer was no comfort at all. William felt deep gratitude toward Elizabeth, real fear for his father, and a sharp, sickening feeling that stepping up might look like pure ambition. He had spent years walking a fine line, proving he could serve without looking hungry for the crown. Now, simply doing what he was told could be twisted as a win, and that thought cut deeper than the weight of the job itself. Charles stepped closer, finally laying out what his mother truly believed, according to private records written after their conversation. Elizabeth's wish wasn't just about who sits on the throne. She believed William was the only one who could bring the monarchy into the modern world without losing its heart. He could change the old ways without destroying what they meant to people. That, she had warned, would be the crown's ultimate test. Kate got his handwritten message a few moments later. She read it twice, leaned against the table to steady herself, and wrote back 4 simple words: "You are not alone." William stared at the reply, drawing strength from the pure certainty behind it. Nearby, Camilla sat with a cup of tea that had gone stone cold. Every footstep in the hallway was a stark reminder that palace life was already shifting around a new team. She knew William taking over meant her own influence would fade, and she could feel that power slipping away in real time. Then the prince opened Elizabeth's envelope. There was only 1 page inside. The rest had been locked away in a private Windsor vault, set to be released only after one specific family event occurred. That missing piece pointed back to the exact moment Elizabeth decided William's future couldn't just be left to tradition. This whole thing didn't start in the throne room, and it didn't start with Charles. It began years ago on a cold night at Windsor. Right after a family dinner when Queen Elizabeth asked everyone to leave except William. What happened next wasn't a formal meeting or a lesson on the Constitution. It was a grandmother staring down the future of everything she had spent a lifetime protecting, deciding that one quiet conversation would one day alter the fate of the crown. Elizabeth had watched the monarchy weather scandal after scandal, deep family rifts, and a growing public demand for total honesty. Every single crisis had chipped away at trust, and she was terrified that another rocky transition might break the institution for good. On the surface, the Platinum Jubilee, that massive celebration marking 70 years on the throne, looked like a complete triumph. But under all that applause, she saw the danger. Time was running out for her. Charles's long-awaited reign was still ahead, and the next generation was going to inherit deep wounds that fancy ceremonies just couldn't fix. William brought something totally different to the table. Sure, his place in line gave the monarchy stability. But his life with Kate and the kids offered something much warmer. A real family people could actually relate to. During that final balcony appearance, Elizabeth watched William gently guide George to the front, while quietly keeping the pressure off her. He managed to protect both his son and his queen without making a scene. Later that night, after William left, the Queen asked Charles to stay behind. According to records kept for the Royal Archive, she dropped one sentence that changed everything. "He understands that the crown has to protect the people before it protects itself." Those words hit Charles way harder than she probably meant them to. He had spent decades waiting in the wings, sticking to his duty through public mockery, disappointment, and personal heartbreak. Now, his own mother was basically telling him his reign might just be a stepping stone rather than the main event he always envisioned. He asked her straight up if all those years of waiting were just leading to an early surrender. Elizabeth didn't sugarcoat it. She made it clear this wasn't a rejection, it was protection. His job, she told him, is knowing when saving the monarchy matters more than holding on to his own power. That warning cut deep, but she knew her son well enough to know that his sense of duty would force him to go along with it. Right then and there, she dictated a private memorandum with 3 specific triggers: falling public support, rising instability, or Charles simply realizing that waiting any longer would hurt the crown. She then had the document split up. One half stayed with Charles, and the other was locked away in the Windsor vault for William, making sure neither man could mess with her final wish on his own. Years later, Charles finally knew those conditions were met. But the second Camilla found out about the document, she refused to let him sign it without one last showdown. Elizabeth might have written the future behind closed doors, but Camilla wasn't about to watch it all unfold without fighting for the life she and Charles had built together. Just hours before Charles walked into the throne room, Camilla stood right between him and his study door. No staff, no advisors, no rehearsed lines. Just a husband holding his mother's final decree and a wife realizing that one signature would destroy the royal partnership they were supposed to share. When she asked if William had forced his hand, Charles' reply hurt worse than any accusation. Camilla had survived years of public hate only because Charles always had her back. His reign had turned all that backlash into respect and put her right next to him as queen. Now, this declaration threatened something way deeper than a title. It handed operational control, the power to run daily royal business, schedule events, and call the shots, straight to William's upcoming team. She would still be by Charles's side, but the palace would no longer revolve around them. Camilla lost her cool. She called him out for letting Elizabeth control their lives from beyond the grave. According to private records saved for the archive, she asked him point-blank if his mother had ever actually trusted his choices. That hit hard because it wasn't just about the crown, it was about their marriage. Their fight, and every single year they spent proving they belonged at the top. Charles wasn't having it. He told her flat out that this was his choice, and she needed to leave his mother out of it. He had stalled long enough. Waiting any longer wasn't caution anymore. It was pure pride. Camilla reached for the document, but Charles pulled it back and set his pen right beside it. That simple move ended the argument instantly. She looked at him and asked, "And where does this leave me?" "Beside me," the king said, "but no longer between William and his duty." That answer crushed whatever hope she had left. Camilla then dropped a bomb. Senior staff were already jumping ship and pledging loyalty to the prince. Documents were getting redirected. Private secretaries were quietly taking orders from William's camp. His new court, she said, had been taking shape right under their noses for weeks. Charles didn't even deny it. He admitted he personally approved every single detail. This was no panic move or sign of weakness. It was calculated, carefully timed, and kept strictly under wraps until the absolute last minute. Camilla walked away without another word. She shut the study door behind her, leaving Charles alone with the paper and the heavy silence in the room. A few moments later, he called in the Lord Chamberlain, the top official who handles major royal events, and told him to bring out the final paperwork. Charles had just survived the most personal fight of his life, but his next hurdle would be taking on the palace system itself. A royal signature looks great on paper, but it means nothing if the system behind it doesn't back it up. Behind all the traditions stood a network of advisors, constitutional experts, top secretaries, and palace staff whose green light would decide if Charles' final move became real power or just a fancy photo op. In one tense closed-door meeting, the king had to face men who had served the crown for decades, men who were terrified that handing power to William while Charles was still king would split the palace into two competing camps. Before anyone could push back, Charles slammed both hands on the table. His private secretary could see how exhausted he was underneath his calm exterior, but the king refused to even sit down. This decree would keep Charles as the sovereign, the guy who officially held the crown while handing William complete control over daily operations, top hires, big public appearances, and the whole future strategy of the royal family. But without rock-solid boundaries, every single speech, state event, or government briefing could turn into a total mess over who was actually calling the shots. The advisors weren't doubting the king's devotion. They were wondering if he was being forced into stepping down. Charles took that as a total insult. According to official notes from the meeting, he told them straight up that hanging on to power is easy when an entire system is built to protect you. Giving it up on your own terms takes real strength. William didn't walk in until the argument had already gotten ugly. He could tell right away that the staff were trying to spin the wording in a way that made his dad look weak, and he shut it down instantly. He refused to take power if it meant embarrassing Charles in public, because tearing down the king just to boost the heir would wreck the very institution they were trying to save. The future king made one thing crystal clear: every single release had to protect his father's dignity, his ongoing role, and his official status as king. Charles looked at his son, and for a split second, the heavy tension between them shifted. This wasn't some power-hungry heir making a grab for the throne. It was a son standing up for his father, the man whose own sacrifice was making this entire shift possible. That's when a top advisor dropped a major roadblock. The whole deal couldn't officially kick in until William read the rest of Elizabeth's message and signed a formal agreement spelling out his duties to Charles. It was basically a written guarantee to make sure this new power shift didn't turn into a silent coup against the reigning king. With everyone in the room holding their breath, William opened those missing pages from Windsor. Turns out, Elizabeth saw this pushback coming from a mile away. Her final order was completely blunt. No official was allowed to hide behind old traditions just to stall necessary change. The Queen knew that ancient rules could keep things stable, but they could also be used to hide real fear. Charles watched as his advisors dropped their objections one by one. William signed the agreement, and the green light was given. Then a private secretary burst into the room with complete panic on his face. The news had leaked before the official announcement could go live, out of nowhere. Kate, Camilla, and William were exposed to a massive public firestorm they weren't ready for. The plan had survived all the secret backroom drama, but now that the world knew, the palace completely lost control of the narrative. The leak hit newsrooms just 23 minutes before Charles was scheduled to speak. A single headline flashed across TV screens everywhere. The king was handing operational control of the monarchy over to William, carrying out a secret order left behind by Queen Elizabeth. Inside Buckingham Palace, the phones started ringing off the hook before anyone even had a statement ready. In a flash, a private family decision exploded into a full-blown national crisis, forcing every member of the royal family to show their cards on live TV. Charles could only watch as control slipped through his fingers faster than any PR team could fix it. Reporters were already going wild, asking if the king was abdicating, stepping down, or getting pushed out by his own son. Abdication means a monarch formally gives up the crown completely, which was definitely not what was happening here. Charles would stay king while William took over running the day-to-day show. But with one sloppy headline, a carefully planned transition was suddenly looking like a full-on palace coup. Kate got the alert right as she was getting ready for the ceremony. She closed her folder, cleared the room, and called William right away. She didn't ask about the power their team was getting. Her very first thought was whether his father was doing okay. That hit William hard, especially since the public was already spinning Charles's sacrifice into wild rumors about weakness, failing health, and family betrayal. William felt his shock instantly turn into anger. He had only agreed to this deal because it protected the crown and kept his father's dignity intact. Now, this leak was wrecking both. According to reports from the palace communications team, he laid down the law. No statement was allowed to frame this shift as a retreat. Charles wasn't being pushed out, he was choosing the exact right moment for his son to step up. Camilla made her own move. She flat out refused to stand next to the king during the initial announcement, telling an aide in a recorded chat that she wasn't going to smile for the cameras while the world celebrated her husband being sidelined. She got the need for stability, but she refused to fake it and pretend this didn't hurt. Then security tracked down where the leak actually came from. It didn't come from William's team, and it didn't come from the press office. It came straight from an internal memo passed around by Charles's own longtime staff. Just like that, distrust exploded through hallways that had relied on absolute loyalty for decades. One courtier finally came clean about leaking it on purpose. He claimed the public deserved to know the full truth about how massive this shift was before the palace PR team could tone it down. Charles listened to the confession without even raising his voice. But the dead silence that followed was way scarier than any explosive anger. William figured his father would immediately launch a full-blown investigation. Instead, the king asked him to meet one-on-one in the palace garden before going live. No advisors, no legal papers, and 0 witnesses. With the whole palace falling apart into paranoia behind them, father and son stepped outside to figure out if they still trusted each other enough to carry the weight of the crown together. Far away from the meeting rooms and spying eyes, Charles and William stood alone under the trees where generations of royals had paced during their worst private moments. For the first time all day, neither man was speaking as a king or an heir. Charles looked at his son not as the future of the monarchy, but as the boy whose entire life was claimed by duty before he could even wrap his head around the cost. Then, he dropped a warning William never saw coming. Charles let the silence linger before trying to explain what Elizabeth was really trying to do. No secretaries, lawyers, or family members were there to spin his words. Just father and son, no protocol, no history, and definitely no crown getting in the way. William listened as his dad admitted that Elizabeth's last wish wasn't just about securing the line of succession. She wanted to stop duty from destroying another generation. The late queen had spent a lifetime watching royal responsibility turn love into distance and personal pain into quiet suffering. She was terrified that the very same system giving William a purpose would slowly strip away Kate, his kids, and eventually William himself from the life he was trying so hard to protect. Charles really struggled to get the words out, the kind of stuff decades of royal discipline had trained him to bottle up, according to private records saved from their talk. He actually apologized for every single time duty made him emotionally distant. For years, William had to convince himself that silence meant love, restraint meant protection, and absence was just duty. But the king knew no explanation could ever bring those lost years back. That apology cut right through William's anger. He confessed to his dad that taking over right now felt like kicking him while he was down. The prince was terrified the public would look at him and see a power-hungry heir instead of a son just doing what he was told. Charles shut that down immediately. Walking away from this deal wouldn't protect him. It would just turn his sacrifice into a total embarrassment and make Elizabeth's last wish look like a joke. Then the king put both hands on his son's shoulders. "Do not become me. Do not wait so long to choose your family that the crown makes the choice for you." William's voice dropped, and he admitted that his grandmother had actually given him the exact same warning years ago at Windsor. Elizabeth had told him straight up that the monarchy would only survive if the people wearing the crown stayed human. Power gets you respect, but being relatable is what keeps people's trust. The future king finally gave in and agreed to sign off on the declaration. But he had one condition. Charles had to stay on as his key advisor and stand right by his side during major national moments. His dad agreed. Together, they walked back toward the palace, completely unaware that thousands of people had already gathered outside the gates. That private conversation in the garden had finally settled the family's biggest conflict. But now it was up to the public to decide whether Charles's final move was a sign of surrender or true greatness. At 6 o'clock sharp, every major TV channel broke into regular programming. The royal flag was still flying high above Buckingham Palace, but the announcement delivered below it made one thing clear. An entire era had just ended, and a new one was beginning. All across Britain, people froze in train stations, shops, offices, and living rooms as Charles explained why he was handing over the active running of the monarchy to William. Then the cameras caught the one visual that defined the whole day. Charles spoke deliberately, knowing a single wrong word could spin this sacrifice into a massive scandal. The official statement laid it out plain and simple. He would stay king while William took the wheel on daily operations. This was definitely not an abdication. He wasn't giving up the throne. It was a calculated handoff meant to keep things stable while letting the next generation step up and lead. William stood right beside his dad as messages started flooding in from Commonwealth nations and political leaders around the globe. The Commonwealth is that voluntary network of countries tied by shared history, and their leaders now had to acknowledge William's new authority without undermining Charles as king. Every single word in those official statements was chosen with extreme care, because the crown could never survive with two competing bosses. Outside Buckingham Palace, the rain kept coming down, but the crowd didn't budge. Thousands were glued to the big screens near the gates. The exact second Charles handed Elizabeth's letter over to his son, the entire crowd went dead silent. Then, a massive roar of applause started right at the front gates and swept all the way down the mall like a giant wave. William didn't smile. He knew this moment was a heavy mix of victory and deep pain. According to official recordings of his first speech, he flat out refused to celebrate taking power. Instead, he opened his grandmother's letter and read her final sentence out loud for the world to hear. "The crown survives when service is passed forward without resentment." Those words completely shifted the public mood. Some commentators called the move a painful admission that Charles's reign could no longer go on as originally planned. Others saw it as the single most selfless act of his entire public life. By the next morning, one major newspaper ran a full-page photo of father and son right under the headline. "The King Who Chose the Future." Camilla watched the broadcast alone before walking back in to join Charles. The Queen Consort had spent decades fighting for a spot by his side, but she finally got that her whole world had just shifted. She reached out and took the king's hand without saying a word. The power had moved on, but the loyalty wasn't going anywhere. William caught that quiet moment and finally understood what his grandmother's last wish had demanded from all of them. The cheering crowd outside was cheering for his future, but the real sacrifice inside belonged entirely to his dad. The applause was for William's era, but history's final verdict would belong to the father who found the courage to step back. Charles's last public move wasn't an abdication, a surrender, or running away from duty. It was the fulfillment of a private promise made to the woman who taught him everything about service. Elizabeth had asked him to recognize the exact moment when loving the crown meant handing the reins over to someone else. By making that choice for William before circumstances forced his hand, Charles turned a personal sacrifice into the ultimate act of kingship. In the end, Charles knew this declaration did something way bigger than just handing over daily operations. It tied 3 generations together in one final act of duty. Elizabeth mapped out the future. Her son carried the heavy, painful weight of deciding when that future had to start. And William stepped up to take it, without ever letting ambition get in the way of love. The king stayed sovereign on paper, while the prince stepped up as the real leader running daily operations, steering the crown and shaping its next chapter. For the king, a reign was no longer measured by time or how much power he kept in his hands. Length doesn't mean sacrifice. And power can't explain real courage. His proudest moment became his choice to step back peacefully before sickness, crisis, or death threw the monarchy into chaos. What looked like surrender to some was actually the ultimate flex of strength. William took on the responsibility without any victory lap. The future king didn't rush to take over new offices or demand instant changes. Instead, he met with his father behind closed doors. Royal archive records show he thanked Charles and promised his wisdom would still guide every major decision. The prince took the leadership handed to him, but he refused to throw away his father's experience just because a new era was starting. After the last guests cleared out, quiet fell over the throne room. William noticed the king's signet ring sitting right beside Elizabeth's letter. He picked up the engraved ring, walked over to Charles, and gently placed it in his father's hand. Charles looked down at it, then folded his son's fingers around it. That simple moment showed what Elizabeth's wish was really about. She wasn't just trying to pass power to William, she wanted to heal the rift that duty had built between father and son, between 2 reigns, and between the family and the heavy crown they carried. Camilla accepted her quieter role right by the king's side, while Kate prepared to back William without letting the 2 households turn into competing camps. Their royal schedules merged into one unified front. Authority had moved on, but the family stayed solid. Charles proved that being a great king isn't about holding the throne the longest. Sometimes, true kingship is knowing when duty demands passing the torch. Elizabeth's wish was carried out. William's future was locked in. Charles walked off the public stage not diminished, but finally understood as a king who protected the future and a father who put his son first. And as Charles stepped back and William stepped up, the crown didn't lose a king. It witnessed the final, selfless purpose of his entire reign. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.